If ICSC taught you to spot a device, ISC wants you to argue with it. And that's the actual shift. And it is where marks get lost even by the strongest students. They correctly identify the paradox or dramatic irony and then just stop. Same way they used to do in their 10th boards. Examiners at this level are explicitly looking for analysis, synthesis, and personal response, not just identification. So today, full toolkit straight from Macbeth, your Rhapsody poems, and Prism stories, upgraded for what ISC is actually asking. Paper 2, Literature, 80 marks. Section A is shorter, more direct, and it only requires factual recall and quick interpretation. Section B is where the real marks sit. Long answer questions on drama, prose, and poetry, with internal choice and the word limit you need to respect. Here is what separates a full mark answer from a component one at this level. 1. Don't just identify a device. Track how it operates across the whole passage, not just one line. Connect the device to tone, theme, or a character's psychology, not just it creates effect. When a question genuinely asks for your response, have one, a real interpretive stance. Let's start with Donne's poem, Death Be Not Proud. Donne speaks directly to death as though a person is listening to him. Death is personified throughout. The entire poem is built on apostrophe, which immediately sets up a confrontation and not a description, treated as an opponent to be argued down, rather than an abstract concept. But the device doing the real heavy lifting is paradox. Death is supposed to be final, absolute, undefeated, and Donne's entire argument is that death itself will die. That death is not as powerful as it is made out to be. That is not just a decorative line at the end. That paradox is the argument of the poem, and structurally, that is a metaphysical conceit. Donne builds an extended, almost legal sounding argument across the whole sonnet rather than a single neat comparison. Now, if you are asked about the structure of the argument here, that's your answer. One continuous logical case, not isolated images. Now, let's take another example from Tennyson's Tithonus. This poem works completely different. It is a dramatic monologue. One speaker, Tithonus, addressing a silent listener, goddess of dawn, and everything you learn about his suffering comes through what he chooses to say to her. The whole poem leans on a mythological allusion, a mortal granted immortality but not eternal youth, aging forever without the mercy of death. You don't need to explain the myth in full, but you do need to show that you know it's there, because the tragedy of the poem depends on that backstory. And watch for the imagery of decay set directly against the imagery of eternal youthful nature around him. That contrast, that juxtaposition is doing as much work as any single metaphor in this poem. Talking about telephone conversation, it is built entirely on irony and discomfort. The poet stages a phone call where the landlady is asking the speaker a blunt, reducing question about his skin color. And the power of the poem is in how the dialogue is clipped. Hesitant rhythm mirrors the speaker's internal reaction. And if you're asked about the tone here, track how it moves from polite to sardonic to something closer to quiet defines across the poem. That tonal arc is what the device question is actually asking about. Now let's take an example from Macbeth, Act 3 to Act 5. Soliloquy is your single most important device here because it is your direct line into Macbeth's psychology. Track how the soliloquies change across these three acts, confident and calculating earlier, paranoid and isolated in the middle, and by Act 5, something closer to numb despair when he hears of Lady Macbeth's death. A strong answer doesn't just say that this is a soliloquy revealing his guilt. Instead, it places that soliloquy on the arc of his unraveling and says what's changed since the last one. Dramatic irony runs through almost every scene from here onwards. The audience knows about the witch's prophecies and Macbeth's guilt in a way that other characters on the stage don't. And that gap is exactly what generates tension in the scenes like Banquet. Then there are big reoccurring image clusters. First one is blood, standing for guilt that cannot be washed away. Second is sleep and sleeplessness, standing for the conscience that won't rest. Third is darkness and night, standing for concealment of what shouldn't survive daylight. These are not just one-off images. They build across the whole play. So if a question asks about the imagery in the given extract, always ask, what reoccurring motif that image belongs to and what it is added to by this point in the play. And don't skip foreshadowing. Early prophecy and imagery are constantly setting up the ending, and examiners like questions that ask you to trace forward from an earlier moment to its later payoff. Now let's quickly complete the prism part. Quicker treatment here, but the same toolkit. Across the stories like the medicine bag, the cookie lady, and indigo, look for an object or action carrying the symbolic weight. It could be heritage or connection or growth, plus a consistent tone, whether nostalgic, guilty, or quietly hopeful. Same three-step process as everything else. Name the device, point to the moment, and explain what it is doing to the story's meaning. Let's now discuss something extra, something beyond these named devices. 3 more tools ISC specifically rewards, even though they're not devices in the traditional sense: tone, diction, and structure. Tone, the writer's or the speaker's attitude towards their subject. Diction, why this specific word was chosen over an obvious synonym. Structure, why a poem breaks where it breaks, or why a scene is built the way it is. Weaving these into a device-based answer instead of treating devices as standalone checklist is usually what pushes a good answer into a full mark one. Let's quickly do a rapid recap so that everything that we have studied in this video gets stuck to your brain forever. Apostrophe, addressing someone who is not there. Personification, human qualities on something non-human. Paradox, a statement that looks contradictory but reveals a truth. Metaphysical conceit, one elaborate or sustained argument or comparison. Dramatic monologue, a single speaker addressing a silent listener. Allusion, a reference assuming a shared background knowledge. Juxtaposition, contrasting images placed side by side. Irony, said versus meant, expected versus actual. Soliloquy, a character's private thoughts spoken aloud. Dramatic irony, audience knows more than the characters. Motif, a reoccurring image building meaning over time. Foreshadowing, an early hint at what is coming. Symbolism, one thing standing in for something larger. That's the toolkit updated for ISC. Done. Tennyson, Volsoenka, Macbeth's Unraveling, and Prism stories, all in one pass. The move going forward, don't just spot the device, follow it across the passage and connect it to what the writer is actually trying to do. Comment down below what text you want, broken down extract by extract, and I will build the next video around it. See you in the next video.